Part 1. The Empire Rises. In the early 20th century, Japan was no longer a small island nation. It had transformed itself into an empire. Factories replaced rice fields, battleships replaced fishing boats, and a new generation was raised to believe that Japan was destined to rule Asia. By the 1930s, Japanese forces had invaded China. Cities burned, millions suffered. The empire was expanding, and nothing seemed able to stop it. But there was one obstacle standing in the way of total domination of the Pacific: the United States. America controlled the sea routes. America controlled the oil. America controlled the industrial supply that Japan desperately needed to continue its expansion. To Japanese military leaders, this was unacceptable. They believed that if they could cripple the U.S. Navy, America would retreat, and Japan would rule the Pacific uncontested. On December 7, 1941, they launched their gamble. Before dawn, hundreds of Japanese aircraft rose from aircraft carriers hidden in the Pacific. They flew low, avoiding detection. Below them lay Pearl Harbor. American sailors were waking up. Some were eating breakfast, others were still asleep. Then the first bombs fell. Explosions tore through battleships. Planes were destroyed on the ground. Oil burned across the water. Within 2 hours, more than 2,400 Americans were dead. In Tokyo, generals celebrated. They believed they had won. They believed America would now negotiate for peace. They had no idea what they had just unleashed. The next day, President Franklin D. Roosevelt stood before Congress. He called it a date which will live in infamy. The United States declared war. What followed was the greatest mobilization in human history. Factories were converted overnight. Car companies began building tanks. Shipyards produced vessels faster than anyone thought possible. Women went to work. Teenagers volunteered. Farmers became soldiers. The nation became a war machine. Meanwhile, the Japanese Empire continued to expand. They captured the Philippines. They pushed through Southeast Asia. They controlled most of the Pacific. But something had changed. America was coming. In June of 1942, 6 months after Pearl Harbor, the two powers collided near a tiny island called Midway. Japan planned to destroy the last American aircraft carriers. But American intelligence had broken Japanese codes. They knew the attack was coming. When Japanese planes left their carriers, American bombers were already in the air. What happened next shocked the world. Within minutes, 3 Japanese carriers were in flames. A 4th was sunk soon after. Japan had lost the core of its navy in a single battle. The empire was no longer unstoppable. The tide had turned, but the war was far from over. The Japanese Empire still controlled thousands of islands. Each one was fortified. Each one was defended by soldiers trained to never surrender. To reach Japan, America would have to fight its way across an ocean, and the true nightmare was just beginning. Part 2. The Ocean of Fire. After the Battle of Midway, the Japanese Empire was wounded, but not defeated. Its soldiers still controlled vast stretches of the Pacific. Its generals still believed they could outlast America. But they were about to face something they had never fought before. A nation with unlimited factories and unlimited resolve. The next battlefield was a place called Guadalcanal. Deep in the jungles of the Solomon Islands, Japanese forces had begun building an air base that would allow them to control the skies over the Pacific. If they succeeded, American ships would be cut off, so the United States Marines were sent in. They landed under fire. The jungle was thick. The enemy was hidden everywhere. Day and night the fighting never stopped. Rain fell, diseases spread, food ran low. But the Marines held. For 6 brutal months, Guadalcanal became a graveyard for the Japanese advance. When the fighting ended, the Japanese were forced to retreat. For the first time, their empire was shrinking. From that moment on, the strategy was clear. America would not fight everywhere. It would strike where it mattered most. This became known as island hopping. Instead of attacking every enemy position, U.S. forces targeted the most strategic islands, cutting supply lines and isolating entire Japanese garrisons. Thousands of enemy soldiers were left stranded, starving, powerless. The empire was being strangled. The battles grew more intense as American forces moved closer to Japan. At Tarawa, soldiers waded through water under heavy fire. At Saipan, cliffs became places of tragedy. At Peleliu, the heat and blood soaked the ground. Japanese troops fought to the last man. They believed surrender was dishonor, and they made the Americans pay for every inch. But no matter how hard they fought, they could not stop the tide. American factories kept producing. American ships kept arriving. American planes filled the sky. The Japanese empire was being pushed backward, island by island, mile by mile. By 1944, the war had reached a turning point. American bombers could now strike Japan itself. Cities were burning. Supplies were running out. The empire that once ruled the Pacific was now fighting for survival. But the most brutal battles were still ahead, and the cost of victory would soon reach unimaginable levels. Part 3. The Fall of an Empire. By 1945, the Japanese Empire was cornered. Its navy was shattered. Its skies were filled with American bombers. Its cities were burning. But its leaders still refused to surrender. They believed that if they could make the final battles painful enough, the United States would negotiate. They were about to learn how wrong they were. The invasion of Iwo Jima was a nightmare. The island was small, but it was filled with thousands of Japanese soldiers hiding in tunnels beneath the ground. When American Marines landed, the beaches were quiet. Then the guns opened. Every step forward was met with fire. Every hill was a fortress. For more than a month, the battle raged. When it finally ended, nearly 7,000 Americans were dead. But Iwo Jima gave the United States a base to strike Japan directly. The end was coming. Then came Okinawa. It was the last barrier before the Japanese mainland. The battle lasted nearly 3 months. Kamikaze pilots crashed into American ships. Entire towns were destroyed. Civilians were trapped in the chaos. By the time it was over, more than 200,000 people were dead. American leaders knew something terrifying. An invasion of Japan itself would be even worse. Millions would die. The war had to end. In August 1945, the United States made a decision that would change the world. 2 atomic bombs were dropped, Hiroshima, Nagasaki. Within days, Japan surrendered. The empire that had once ruled the Pacific was gone. But what followed was not vengeance. It was rebuilding. Japan was transformed. Democracy was introduced. A former enemy became a partner. The Pacific became a region of peace and prosperity. This was more than a military victory. It was the defeat of an empire that believed it could dominate the world. And it proved something powerful. When a free people unite, When a nation fights not for conquest but for survival and liberty, even the mightiest empires can fall.